Welcome to the future. This is Ina Braxton from the Digital Future Lab, and you're listening to our weekly DFL podcast, where we cover the state of the gaming industry, technology, and diversity. Here are your hosts, Samantha Riley and Jesus Govella.
Hey, and welcome to the DFL podcast. I am Jesus.
And I'm Samantha.
And today we're joined by Jordan and Ethan from the audio team.
Hi, I'm Jordan. I'm the audio lead and a music composer at the DFL.
Hi, my name's Ethan, and I'm a musical composer with Jordan at the Digital Future Lab.
And we're really excited to have them here today since they are part of the audio team. We'll be talking about music in video games, and I think they'll provide a lot of insight from their perspective working on Seed, our unreleased game, and then just their personal experience with music and games. We'll start off with just talking about our own personal interest in music and then get into specific games, and then also talk about the music in Seed, our unreleased game.
Yeah, so a lot of the time I listen to alternative or indie music, but when I'm like studying or writing, I like to listen to like piano arrangements or marching band arrangements, as nerdy as that is, because I used to be in drumline in high school, so I like to kind of reminisce.
Right, and I'm kind of similar. I tend to listen to more instrumental stuff, a lot of video game soundtracks, just playing in the background while I work or study, with some, like rock or just pop, 80s music sprinkled in there. And I typically lean more towards calming harmonies, melodies, stuff like that, rather than hard beats and rock and roll and stuff like that.
And for me, normally like my everyday music, like when I'm driving or just doing, everyday things, I'll listen to R&B. But then aside from that, like I also really like listening to like waterfall piano soundtracks or like the lo-fi hip-hop beats on Spotify. I really like that just for like if I'm studying or doing something kind of more chill. That will be my go-to.
Let's see. For me, I usually tend to prefer the Japanese melodic style. So then this applies to all the genres I see it in, except for blues. And yeah, I think blues is the only one that I haven't seen or I haven't researched about any Japanese artists. But so blues, ragtime, lounge jazz in particular out of the jazz types, and then video game music, usually on the calming side too. But occasionally I do like a bit of action here and there, so that or melodic EDM.
Mm-hmm. All right, so related to that is, I guess we'll ask everyone, what kinds of sounds or instruments do you find most pleasing, just in general?
In general, I definitely find string instruments pleasing. I actually recently just got a cello because I love the sound of it so much. But even though in high school I was in band, I always loved listening to the orchestra and just how they conveyed emotion so well. Sometimes it was hard for me to not like start to tear up listening to them. So definitely string instruments. So I've written for a lot of string instruments despite not playing one yet.
Yeah, and for me, I used to play the alto sax in high school, so I found that sound to be pretty pleasing to me. But in most other music, I typically like choir sort of vocals, stuff like that. Not so much lyrics, but just sounds from someone's voice or a harmony, like a whole choir. That I really like that a lot.
So for me, the first thing that comes to mind is piano because I did play that growing up. I also played violin, but I don't think I resonate with the sound of a violin as much, even though I do think it makes beautiful music. Just the sounds from a piano, I feel like I can resonate more with like, I feel like there's like a build-up and you can have something be really intense and like really fast music, or you can have something kind of more like a melody that's more calm. So yeah, definitely piano.
I think for me, it's kind of hard. I have 3 different choices, but I think the first one has to go to the piano. And then very closely behind that would be the music box and then the accordion.
Now, I guess now we'll ask, are there any games that stand out to you right now? Just music from any game that you're just like, oh, that's my go-to or something.
Yeah, actually, I've always been in love with the Halo soundtracks. Especially Halo Reach is what comes to mind first. I wasn't very good at the game, but the music, like the start screen music, I just always found it so beautiful, especially like the strings and the choir they used, and that's kind of just like what the level I aspire to reach one day.
Okay. And for me, I've recently been playing Kingdom Hearts, so all that, it's an amazing soundtrack filled with a bunch of exciting battle music, and also a lot of just calm ambience and overworld themes. So that's my go-to right now.
So for me, I think my answer is gonna differ from the rest of us, but I feel like as in music and video games, I feel like I resonate more with like just music and other forms of media, like movies or contemporary dance. Like the first thing that comes to mind is in The Greatest Showman, in Rewrite the Stars, like their whole dance scene with the music that like builds up with like each movement, like that is the soundtrack that comes to mind right away, is the soundtrack from The Greatest Showman.
My best friend is still trying to get me to watch that movie. I already read the spoilers for it, so I think I'm good. But the soundtracks that come to mind for me, I guess, would be the Professor Layton series. I especially love the end credit themes, which include Iris, and then I don't remember the name of the other one. I don't think he was named, but that's where I get the idea of the music box and the accordion from. But it also sounds very well with the piano, and that's part of why I love those instruments, because that was my very first.
All right. And now we'll ask everyone, is there any kind of games like that you played, or anything from a movie or anything, soundtracks from games or movies that kind of resonate with you when you hear them, that brings back memories from your childhood?
This is going to be kind of a silly answer, but anytime I hear Life is a Highway, I remember playing the Disney Cars game on my Xbox 360. It was just like, basically just like, level track music as you were driving along. So anytime I hear Life is a Highway, I just think of Cars.
All right, yeah, I can see that. Me too. For me, pretty much any song from Zelda, The Wind Waker, just puts me back when I was a kid with my GameCube, sitting in my kitchen for some reason, just playing, messing around, getting lost, not knowing what to do. But it was really fun, and I always think of that when I play that game or hear music from it.
That's a hard one for me to decide on, because it's still Professor Layton, but I'd say also between that and Mario Galaxy, just because I think that was the first orchestral soundtrack that really got to me, I guess, because of the, that sort of Nintendo wonder. It's like Disney in that it makes you think of magic and just childhood and, reaching for the stars in that case. But
So we're going to get into our next question. So should a game soundtrack try to stay in the background, or should it try to reach the player?
That's kind of a hard question from a musical perspective, because obviously I want the player to listen and appreciate the music. So I think in a way, it should definitely resonate with them, and they should, be listening to it, and it should help enhance their game experience. But, level tracks are usually in the background. They're not supposed to be super loud. It's just kind of, it's there so, the level isn't boring just without any music. And as you play through, you might notice more music, but I think it should stay primarily in the background.
Right, yeah, and I've played a few games where taking away the music during a sort of serious part of the game, really, you can really feel it. Like, it's really noticeable when the music stops playing and all you hear is the sound effects. And yeah, I think it depends just on the game and what's happening.
I completely agree. Like, it just really depends on what game you're playing. I think in some instances, like, having the music be very, like, apparent will add, like, value to the game where, like, the music is kind of driving emotion for, like, maybe a specific thing you're doing. But then I think some games where maybe it's better just to have it in the background because it could be distracting. So, yeah, I think it really just depends, and also depends on the person. I think some people could get really distracted by music, whereas other people, they could just keep going with the game, and it's not as distracting. It's more motivating, so it really depends on different personalities and what type of game they're playing.
I think the closest opinion I can resonate with is Jordan's, and I think that they would agree with me. I think this would be an add-on. What I say here is just that it should be in the background, but at the same time, it's like not necessarily that we can't be heard. It's more like we're reaching the player just as much as the other elements are, just as much as the art is, just as much as the design, the mechanics, and the narrative in particular. So, but then the other times where I think that it's more apparent than other forms of art in reaching the player would probably be like, for example, in the end credits. I had talked about that a lot, but Pokemon was another good example of where the melody, the song just takes you away and helps explain more of a story aspect versus all the level themes. And I think that's a very common place for where you'll find the music is a lot more, I guess, noticeable. But it does remind me, though. When I was a kid, I played this game, the video game version of Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, if you've ever watched the movie. And my friend, he had me play, but then I just I didn't want to finish it with him because I was so scared of the music. And the music, that was where it got to me a bit too much there.
All right. Now we'll move on to thoughts on use of licensed music in games. So, like, just taking any popular song that's out right now and just plopping it into a game. Sort of like GTA with the in-game radio.
So I think it definitely depends on the game. I can see some games where it might fit, like GTA, or like, I think of like Test Drive, where you would be driving in Hawaii and have in-game radio, where I think that makes sense. In other, like, more animated games, I'm not sure how well licensed music would fit the tone. So I would say they would just have to make a judgment call on, like, what type of game it is and what type of music they want the player to experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm pretty much mostly agree with that. It does have its place. Like in GTA, obviously, the in-game radio, it does add to it, having the licensed music there. Songs you recognize from real life just play in the car while you're doing that. But as for just having that in other places, like not when you're driving and stuff like that, that really just kind of depends. Because I think having lyrics like that can sometimes distract from what's happening in the game, especially if the music's blasting really loud. And it can sometimes take away, depending on the song.
I agree with everything they said. Like, depending on what game it is, like, I just thought about like arcade games or like Dance Dance Revolution. Like, of course you want like music, because it kind of gets you in, it gets you in like the mood to to dance and play the game better. But then I'm thinking like some other games, maybe more like battle themed games, like if you're playing like Call of Duty or something and then a song comes on that you know, and then all of a sudden you're like singing along to that song, like it's totally distracting. Maybe that like it could hurt the game. And yeah, so I think in that case it wouldn't be beneficial. So I think it really has to match like the vibe of the game.
I think going along with the vibe of the game in particular, there are cases where it fits, but then also just perhaps the answer to why video game music or why video game music isn't often licensed is because there's just a lot more purposes that you have to consider, a lot more cues and stories that you have to think about with video games that you don't often have to. Like, take the Ace Attorney series, for example. There's no pop music or just music out there just for no reason, just for listening, that will explain the story of a guy who's defending this random guy from possibly a murder case or something like that. I think that's kind of hard for you to find, like, maybe not impossible, but I think that's a unique situation that you find more often in video games. And, you know, you'll find that a lot just in different mediums, of course. So, like, movies. That's another example, whereas it's different, so.
Yeah, just kind of going off that, like, I agree. I think, like, even when you think about movies, like, when you started talking about that, I thought about, like, in Fast and Furious, when they played See You Again in the last movie. Like, that was, like, I think maybe some people will agree with me. It was such a powerful song for that scene with that song, just, like, everything with, like, the whole backstory behind that. And I think that's similar in video games. If there's, like, a very emotional scene, like, you want, like, a very powerful music to match that. And I think words can convey that sometimes. Like, with See You Again, like, it was very meaningful, but then sometimes words don't really fit. Like, sometimes maybe it's just instrumental and it could give the same effect.
And also, I guess you have to consider the times, especially, sorry if I'm interrupting, but I guess, like, think of the Mario when it first began. There was no way for them to capture any sort of audio. Maybe they would have. It's an interesting thing because of, like, where video games came in the developmental process for audio. And I believe, if I remember right, they started with frequency modulation because pulse code modulation was too much to take at that time for transmitting the sounds. So it was a lot more efficient for the data in particular. And voices at this point would have been too much because a kilobyte was like a gigabyte or a terabyte to us. So.
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah, and kind of to go off that, most of the music in games is just instrumental. So when a piece comes on with lyrics, it really grabs your attention a lot more because you're like, oh, now there's words to the song now. So, and end credits do that a lot. And it always makes it more, like, impactful, like, oh, you made it to the end. It's kind of sad to see it end, but it was a good experience.
You do see actually a lot more, sorry if I keep on interrupting, but you do see a lot more vocals nowadays. Say, like, even with Nintendo, they don't often do this, but the Jump Up Superstar in Mario Odyssey is a very strong example. And I think that's a good sign for the industry.
Right. Now we'll move on to more of Seed-specific music development. And we'll start with just how does composing music for Seed, just in general, begin? Like, what's that process like?
So for me, that process usually starts with coming up with a melody. I'm more of a melody person than a harmony person, so I find it easier to start with the melody. And then afterwards, I'll add in some, like, chords and supporting instruments, and maybe percussion eventually, if it's the right tone for the song. But yeah, just finding, like, a key that I like, messing around with some different notes till I find a solid melody, and then just going from there.
I would say that I don't know if I am either a melodic or harmonic person. A lot of it has to do with, I guess, visualization for me, because then I think a lot of the times we're just telling a story, whether that be with level progression or something like that. So I try to relate that level of progression into a certain part of whatever story I have in my head. So, like, with the forest levels, I guess I thought of, when I was first starting out, maybe, like, wandering through a path or something like that. So that one, I think I made it a bit more cheery than it needed to before I knew about the context of the game. But I usually visualize the scene that I have in mind along with that story, and then I let my mind kind of fill in the sounds. And sometimes something interesting will come out of it that's like not familiar, because usually it's something familiar, right? But after that, then I'll try to transcribe what I hear in my head down onto the sheet music in particular. And then it's a constant cycle of me maybe either starting out with the harmony, whichever comes first, and then listening to that, and then imagining that, and then adding in as my imagination kind of fills in the gaps. Yeah, I'd say that's most of it.
I really like that you guys both have like two different processes, because it really goes to show that there's not like one way to produce music. Like everyone kind of has their own creative process, and I think that's really cool. We'll just have you guys answer some more questions. Just like, do you look at similar games for inspiration, and what are some of the challenges that you face through this process?
I was recommended to listen to the Forest of Ori soundtrack, which kind of has a similar forest setting, and also some of the other ones that I drew inspiration from, kind of not meaning to, was, I guess, Final Fantasy. I've been told some of my music sounds like Final Fantasy music, and I've never played the game, so I guess that's cool. But some of the challenges I've faced have just been really just making my songs long enough. Usually when I come up with a melody, it's pretty short, and I have to find ways to alter it and keep pushing it along so it's actually the right length for a level track, because most of the concepts start out as like 30 seconds to 1 minute, where a level track needs to be more like 2 to 3 minutes. So making it long enough has definitely been my biggest challenge.
Let's see. I already forgot the question. Darn it.
Do you look at similar games for inspiration, and what are some of the challenges you faced?
Let's see. I've listened to a bit of Ori and the Forest. I've listened to a bit of Celeste too. I think that's a bit more action oriented than it needs to be, but I think there are some patterns I think that are applicable as Seed will become more intense. And I've also taken particular inspiration from The Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess. For one of the characters, I think that it has a similar sort of ambience or the similar kind of requirements. But in terms of challenges for me, a lot of it is because I'm going a bit more by my imagination. I'm trying to like think about how do I accomplish the different sound that I have in my head. And sometimes I just have to give up. And in that case, that's where it helps for me to have a lot of theoretical knowledge. Because in that case, then if something doesn't work, then I know, I can probably substitute it with this kind of chord here, or that's probably what's most likely given the amount of dissonance in this area, or like I can hear a third or maybe a perfect fifth, for example. And then that would give me a bit more guidance about where to go with the transcription.
And now we'll ask, what's your guys' experience using dynamic music? Have you considered it using for Seed? Is it, or have you already been messing with that?
Perfect question for the audio lead.
So yeah, the dynamic audio system, I was actually tasked with redesigning a couple quarters ago. So basically, to explain it kind of quickly, so you start out the level with one version of the music, and as things happen in the world of Seed, like a muse, which are like the towers, cast their magic, another layer will be added to the music, and like if you move a muse to a new tile or rostrum, a new layer will be added to the music until you get to like the hopeful version, which means that you're doing well in the level. So the dynamic audio system deals with adding music based on how well you're doing, and we're actually starting to add ambient music and ambient sound effects. So it helps immerse you more into that forest environment. So there'll be like alien bird calls and wind and water and stuff like that. So that's all part of the dynamic music system and like 3D sound to really help the player feel like they're like in that environment and in the world of Seed.
Right, yeah, that's always been very interesting. A lot more games are doing that now with dynamic sound, just to get players more engrossed in the world and have them react to what the player's doing rather than just playing a static track the whole time that loops.
It definitely, yeah, it's very useful for stretching the music in a way that it doesn't become tiring, because League of Legends is a perfect example of this, in that people will be on this for hours and the producers had to think about, okay, so how are we going to keep their interest even despite the fact that they'll be on this like nonstop, that it's going to be after a year or so of like nonstop playing, they'll know all the sounds, it'll be predictable. But what they found was they were able to create different sound bites that would interact with different cues in the environment, that rather collectively created, I guess in itself, different pieces. But then I haven't actually played that, so I haven't known that for sure, but I have friends, and I've also done my own research about dynamic music. I don't have too much. I had to figure out the audio system, the dynamic audio system from the outside, since like I think I was testing it out for Jordan and the audio team at one point, but I guess it would have helped to have asked what the intended cues were, but that was very wicked. Good job.
So have you guys ever thought about using like vocals or a choir into any of the seed music?
For choir? Yeah, definitely, for sure. As for vocals, I think that would be, it would have to be in a different language, I imagine, right?
Probably. We recently figured out that apparently the Muses and the Tali actually do have their own language that they speak. I'm not sure if that language has been invented yet, but the DFL in the past has had like auditions for choirs and stuff, and considered getting like a live choir, and not just like samples of the music. But I'm not sure if there are plans for a choir in the future. I'm not sure how well it worked out last time, but it's definitely a cool idea. I would love to do that.
Yeah, that sounds like it'd be really fun. But that wraps up our questions. Do you guys have anything else you'd like to add about seed or music?
I guess I'd just like to add an encouragement for all those people who maybe they haven't heard about video game music, or they think it's in the background. I encourage you to look into video game music. It's kind of not encouraged by the game developers, but there are people who manage to extract the different soundtracks and the different works of the video game. So I think that it's out there on YouTube, and it's not necessarily as easy to access on Spotify, but I encourage you to give those a listen and try to promote video game music to the point where it can be just as accessible and just as easy to get sheet music. So it would really help the industry. We really encourage it.
All right, yeah, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for joining us. Hope you enjoyed our discussion. I've been Jesus.
And I'm Samantha, and thank you to Ethan and Jordan for joining us today.
Our pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed our discussion. Check us out on Facebook and Instagram at Digital Future Lab, and on Twitter at DFL_studios. Tune in next time for more on games, technology, and diversity.